For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh. Revi on the gist today. Our guest from London is Dr. Avinash Paliwal of SOAS. We're talking about India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Dr. Paliwal, good to see you after a while from London. I know you've been doing a lot of work in the neighborhood.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back again at the gist, Amitabh. It's always a delight to join with you and have conversations about the neighborhood.
We're looking at Afghanistan, Dr. Paliwal, today. And, if it's not man-made problems, nature and its fury, the earthquakes in Paktika, the numbers already crossing 1,000 according to some reports and will go up. India could possibly help a lot in, if they're allowed, to provide humanitarian aid in this situation.
Absolutely. The reports which are coming from Afghanistan about the earthquake, the people who have lost livelihoods, are injured, are absolutely heartbreaking. And I hope that the entire neighborhood, not just India, kind of really steps up and helps the people in Afghanistan by providing kind of aid, medical aid, or all other essentials that are required. For India, it's an important moment, I would say, because there has been a debate in Delhi about whether or not to kind of establish contact with the Taliban, to what extent to establish contact, whether or not to reopen diplomatic presence in Afghanistan. And I think one thing this earthquake, among other issues that are kind of plaguing Afghanistan, demonstrates that India as a regional heavyweight has to continue having its relations with the people of Afghanistan, who require support regardless of the politics of the country and the fact that it is still at war with each other, with itself.
When it is, India decides and announces any kind of package of humanitarian aid in these circumstances, how would we manage to deliver them?
There are multiple routes for the kind of aid which will be required. If it's medical aid, I think we can use the air route using civilian sort of aircraft, right? And that is something which I believe is unlikely to cause much geopolitical anxiety in Islamabad, for that matter, right? Because Pakistan's always concerned about India's presence in Afghanistan. I doubt that India will be able to reuse the land route through Pakistan the way it did to deliver the shipments of wheat a few months back. But the third option is, of course, routing it through Iran. And we have seen in the past that Iran is both interested and capable of offering that kind of logistical support for India for trade and aid purposes as far as Afghanistan is concerned.
Just going back a few days to the Kartiparwan Gurdwara attack, how do you see that in terms of, is it signaling by Pakistan's deep state or the ISI about their ability, capability, intent to hurt India's interests?
There are multiple, I think this attack is really kind of sending multiple signals by the Islamic State Khorasan, right? The first signal is, of course, to India that you have to play cautiously in Afghanistan, in terms of your outreach to the Taliban. So be careful. We can target a gurdwara. We can target anyone else as well. That's one signal that is very clear. It is also a signal that the situation of kind of minorities in Afghanistan have reached a new low. These were the last standing Afghan Sikhs who have literally been pushed out of their homeland now. And I think these are kind of security concerns which India has to factor in terms of its decision making. Whether this is a direct signal from Pakistan, Amitabh, it's something which is difficult to say. Yes, the timing of it does betray some degree of concern, anxiety in Pakistan, given India's outreach to the Taliban recently, official outreach with the officials from the Ministry of External Affairs meeting with Taliban leaders in Kabul and traveling to different parts of in and around Kabul, and promising increased commitment, aid commitment, humanitarian commitment towards the people of Afghanistan. that will invariably cause geopolitical anxiety in Pakistan. And there is a possibility that this attack was sort of, if not directly or deliberately, but with some degree of understanding, tacit understanding, sanctioned from Rawalpindi. But we are not sure about that, right? This is something that needs to be forensically established, and that will take time. What we are certain about is that New Delhi is taking this as a signal from Pakistan, regardless of the intent in Rawalpindi broadly, but right, regardless of the actual tactical aspects of it. And that, I think, is much more important. India has taken this as a signal, and it is kind of reconsidering its own approach and its own strategy towards Afghanistan in context of this attack. We saw that the Home Ministry has started issuing visas, which were long pending for reasons that remain unclear. To those people, to the Sikh families who were in Afghanistan, some of who never wanted to leave the country but have no other options as of now. So I think the fact that Delhi is taking this as a signal from Pakistan perhaps is more significant than what Pakistan is doing, given its own domestic turmoil, both economically and politically.
But like you said, forensic investigations will happen, and you'll have to look at that in detail. But when ISKP claims that it was responsible for the attack, how do you see those dynamics in terms of the Pakistani deep state and the Taliban? I mean, is it what we talked about many years back as well, that's the insurance policy they have if the Taliban is not really falling in line?
I think there is a possibility of that, Amitabh. But again, ISKP is one outfit with which I would be a little bit more cautious, right? If this was Jaish-e-Mohammed, and there have been insinuations in Indian media that it was actually a JEM kind of orchestrated attack with the front being put up by the ISKP. But if it was if that were true, or if it was a Lashkar kind of an operation, or other outfits, kind of factions within the Taliban with whom we know Pakistan enjoys some degree of leverage with, then one can say with much more degree of confidence that this is a signal coming from the Pakistani deep state. But ISKP is a very complex beast. It is something whose, the group has demonstrated a very, impressive capability of keeping its sources of sustenance opaque. Yes, there has to be some link with Pakistan, but there are multiple sources of support that they've been able to kind of garner in the past, including finances from different Gulf states, including local taxation, including kind of, recruitment from different sorts of outfits, both from Pakistan, from within Afghanistan, and the wider region, Central Asia as well. So it's difficult to say with high degree of confidence that this was necessarily a signal that the Pakistani deep state is trying to send to India, and also to the Taliban as an insurance policy that they have cultivated within ISK. Maybe, maybe not. But again, as I said, as far as India is concerned, that's a moot point because it has decided to take that as a signal. And the likelihood of Taliban taking it as a signal as well is pretty high, because the Taliban, including Sirajuddin Haqqani, is interested in having outreach and engagement with the world at large, and definitely India as a regional heavyweight. So whoever did this attack, that's not going to make the Taliban very happy about it, because they know how Indians are reacting to what has just happened.
A question for you from 124 Just Madness. Given the amount of terror activities resuming in Kashmir with the JK police and army neutralizing foreign fighters, are Afghans among them? I haven't seen any reports of Afghans. And is the Taliban capable of curbing anti-India activities? Just an elaboration of what you were saying in your last answer.
So on the issue of Kashmir and Afghanistan, there are, I've always said, and the evidence, at least historical evidence, also suggests that it's not necessarily the Taliban that is pushing kind of fighters and ideologues inside Kashmir. I mean, that is a problem that India has with Pakistan directly. And, Taliban, in fact, has very assiduously, consistently tried to disengage itself from the India-Pakistan rivalry, including on Kashmir. And the current spate of attacks that we are seeing, the targeted killing of, Kashmir non-locals, migrants in Kashmir who are not Kashmiris, and even, Kashmiri pundits or Kashmiri police officers who are Kashmiri Muslims, it's so targeted, it's so calibrated, and none of that has been associated or linked back to Afghanistan as far as the human capital that is concerned in that ecosystem. But yes, we know that the arms that the Taliban captured after the US withdrawal, some of those arms and those technologies have made inroads into Kashmir. But again, that is something that has little to do with the Taliban itself. It is largely to do with the broader Islamist ecosystem in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border areas, which does have some degree of inroads into Kashmir. As far as Taliban being able to counter anti-India activities, look, this is $1 million question, right? Everyone, the United States, the European Union, Iran, even Pakistan for that matter, everyone is asking the question from the Taliban, and this has been one of the biggest bone of contention, that are you a nationalist outfit intent in imposing whatever form of governance and religiosity that you want to impose within the territorial confines of Afghanistan? Or are you a global outfit which will give shelter to global Islamists, right from Al-Qaeda to Islamic State, who have a global revolutionary, Islamic revolutionary agenda at hand? And the Taliban has very strongly suggested that it's an Afghan outfit. It has nothing to do or no interest in hurting others, and they will not allow Afghan soil to be used for targeting anyone outside Afghanistan. But at the same time, they failed to demonstrate any credible kind of, they've not been able to contain a lot of these outfits, right from Lashkar to Jaish to Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, and even their own rivals, Islamic State, from being able to use Afghan soil. And we do know, to add on to that point, we do know that the Al-Qaeda has been making a lot of anti-India propaganda in recent months. That propaganda has actually gone up, not down. And it feeds, and it's the fact that India itself has taken a Hindu nationalist turn in politics. It kind of feeds into that sort of a political dynamic. They legitimize a lot of their acts, as they did with the Karte Parwan Gurdwara attack as well. That we are doing this to in response to this sort of Hindutva ideological moorings that we see emerge or gain ground in India. The fact is that these entities are getting stronger in many ways in Afghanistan, and Taliban may or may not have the capability to prevent them from attacking India if push comes to shove at a later point in time.
Another question that you were answering, this is from Giridhar Mamidi, who says, is the Taliban's bonhomie with Bharat a smoke screen to get desperately needed funding and material support which Pakistan cannot provide?
I don't think this is Taliban is desperate for funding. There is no two ways about that. But I think they're trying to get various powers, not just India, to support them towards their quest. And this is, it's not about whether they can't get funding from Pakistan, given Pakistan's own economic situation, but also because they want to demonstrate some degree of foreign policy autonomy. They don't want to be seen as a proxy of Pakistan, and the best way to send that signal to the world is to have, some degree of open relationship, not just secret back channels with India. So I think this is where the calculation comes in, both politically, financially, and diplomatically, in terms of seeking international legitimacy. But just a note of caution, the conversations that India has been having with the Taliban is not to bestow diplomatic recognition to the group. It's to have some degree of official representation so that people-to-people ties can be maintained, so that India can slowly try to keep an eye out and look after, and even perhaps develop at a future point in time, the multiple infrastructural projects that it invested in over the last 2 decades, right? And some of the MOUs were signed for Shetut Dam and other projects. So these projects need upkeep, and India has the capability of providing that. So it's not necessarily a way of, from Indian perspective, this is not a way of legitimizing or endorsing the Taliban's worldview, but more of making sure that it's not aloof from a strategically valuable neighborhood or a country of immense strategic value in its immediate west.
So do you think you would have answered this question from Matara, who said, I have no idea why some people think fundamental Islamic groups, especially terrorist groups, are ever going to be friends of India, of democracies?
I don't think it's about friendship, Matara. It's not about being friends or being enemies or being. It's simple. It's politics. It's geopolitics. It's about making sure that there is some degree of. this relationship is a transactional relationship. Let's be very clear about that. There is a convergence of interest between India from a geopolitical perspective to regain some sort of a foothold in Afghanistan, which is a country bigger than just the Taliban. And for the Taliban to show whatever it can by having India on board for their own domestic and international purposes, right? So this is not about making friends. This is about ensuring that your national interests and national security needs are met by having presence on the ground. And this is where it's very important to differentiate between India's outreach to Afghanistan, even if it's through the Taliban, and just about engaging with the Taliban. There is a much more compelling logic to India reaching out to the Taliban than just talking to them for the sake of it, or trying to find friends when there is deep ideological mismatch on both sides.
So you were discussing the first publicly announced official visit from India after the Taliban takeover, led by J.P.Singh, the Joint Secretary, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran in the MEA. And subsequently, we don't know whether there'll be more of those kind. What, in your mind, changed? I mean, India evacuated not only its diplomats, but all its nationals that it could. Soon after the 15th of August. What happened in 1 year that allowed India to kind of get its footprint back into Afghanistan?
So there are two things that happened. First of all, India left because at that particular point in time, that is 15th of August 2021, India had lost all the security guarantees that it had, that were existent, till that point in time, which the India's allies in the Islamic Republic and Afghanistan had offered them, and that was, all those guarantees were out of the window. And there was intelligence that the Taliban and the multiple factions which are coming in to take over Kabul might actually target Indian nationals and Indian officials in Kabul. So that was a very clear kind of spot decision taken to secure Indian lives and the lives of Indian officials at that point in time. But that did not mean that India wanted to leave Afghanistan as such, or that India wanted its footprint to be lost entirely in that country. I think that was a very tactical, time-bound decision. This desire to maintain India's relationship with Afghans has always been there. What changes in the last 1 year or so, or short of 1 year actually, is the fact that the calculus of those people who are running Kabul, including the Haqqani family and the Taliban broadly put itself, that itself has changed, right? The Taliban has tasted power to a certain extent. It has also tasted a lot of pressures that comes with governance, and it is also kind of dealing with the fact that now they are in power and their relationship with Pakistan has gone through a qualitative shift. So they are trying to assert their sovereignty, so to say, as an independent entity governing Afghanistan. And that comes, the logic of governance is very different from the logic of when you are an insurgent force. And that has changed primarily. And now for that purpose, you can see that the Haqqanis are literally arbitering peace between the ISI and the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, right? It's quite interesting that the former chief of ISI, Faiz Hamid, would be visiting Kabul after being bruised politically in the Imran Khan and General Bajwa battle that played out with the collapse of the government in Pakistan recently, and then having the Haqqanis arbiter peace or a ceasefire with the TTP in Kabul. That shows how far the Taliban has come in terms of asserting its security importance as far as Pakistan is concerned. And this is where they feel more confident to be able to provide some degree of security, at least in Kabul, to an Indian outpost, so to say, right? Whether it's consular only, diplomatic, whatever the features of it may be in future. But that's where the confidence comes in, that there's political value to it, there's financial value to it, but there's also some degree of requirement, some legitimacy that is accrued out of having India over there. That is what has changed. And the feelers that the Taliban has been sending are very unambiguous. They want India back, and they are willing to address some of the core concerns that India has. And they're also saying very clearly that we will not be taking an anti-India stand as far as the Kashmir dispute is concerned, because we don't want to be caught in between Pakistan-India rivalry. That is a bilateral dispute as far as the Taliban is concerned. And to come to think about that, that's a position that most countries take, and is broadly something that India favors as well.
How do the fault lines, Dr. Paliwal, in the Taliban affect India, and How do we deal with the Haqqanis who were responsible for not only high-profile killings of Indian diplomats and Venkateshwar Rao, Dr. Your Brigadier Defense Attaché, but other Indian citizens as well?
Yes, so this is an excellent question, Amitabh, and you can already see that the degree of caution with which India reached out to the Taliban. There is a long sort of a tale of conversation which has happened behind the scenes before this formal outreach with multiple Taliban figures and not just one faction or the other. And that is something that you have to grant Indian diplomats and officials who have been undertaking this enterprise, that they made sure that they are not talking only or being seen as talking only to the Haqqanis or to the Kandaharis or to any other so-called, any other faction or any specific leader, but to all of them. And a very interesting, it's a subtle, it was not much noticed, but an interesting signal that that was sent was just after the visit of J.P.Singh and other diplomats, other Indian diplomats, one of who was a female diplomat, to put a point across there, an important point there, was the interview of Taliban leaders to Indian television media outlets, right? And here you see Mullah Yaqub, who's a very important leader who represents perhaps the Kandahari Pashtuns, coming in and giving his first TV interview to an Indian media outlet soon after India's outreach, along with Anas Haqqani. So you can see very clearly that India is trying to balance, create some sort of an internal balance in its outreach within these factions and not relying on one or the other and getting caught between internal crossfire within the Taliban. That is absolutely essential. This is how you cushion any potential security risk. If you have, let's assume, an embassy in Kabul moving forward, and you feel that there is a threat emerging from, let's say, one specific faction of the Taliban on whoever so's behest, then the first point of contact and first point of intelligence will be the counterfaction within the Taliban, which will perhaps come to your aid before any other logistical kind of chain kicks in to ensure evacuations via Iran or elsewhere. And this is where you can really see India has put a lot of thought, put a lot of investment in reaching out to all these factions and ensuring that, to whatever extent possible, they have access to, if not influence over, the most powerful faction that play in Kabul and beyond in Afghanistan at this point in time.
You mentioned our diplomat Deepti Jarwal, who had gone with that delegation, symbolic, as you said. How do you see the international community's reactions in terms of sanctions, the United Nations sanctions, the exemptions for travel, which, what was it, 15 leaders, 13 have been granted those exemptions again for possibly another 3 months, but 2 haven't, who are connected with the education ministry, and we know what's happening with women and girls there. Plus, India heads the UN Sanctions Committee and is a non-permanent member.
That's a very clear sign where most countries in the neighborhood, including India, what they feel about some of the injunctions that have been introduced by the Taliban in recent weeks on women's rights and the dress codes. And let's be very clear, the misogyny on display by the Taliban has that's been uncompromising. The political violence, that the use of violence, even to literally disappear or kill opponents domestically, has also been uncompromising. So it's very important to acknowledge and be clear-headed about who we are dealing with. This is not a normal political outfit that you're dealing with in the best of circumstances. This is perhaps a very difficult political militant outfit, still behaving like an insurgent force, trying to govern in a conflict-ridden country which is facing acute economic distress and internal fractures, sociological, societal fractures, right? So that's a very different, there's a very, it's an abnormal situation that you're dealing with, even if it's been there for a while. So these sanctions, the few exemptions that have been given by the United Nations for travel, I think these are the bare minimum that are required to keep the Taliban and whatever little apparatus it has in Afghanistan afloat. Without that, there will be, most likely will be collapse as far as Afghanistan is concerned, and any effort to provide for the people of Afghanistan, even the bare minimum, will not exist. So this is how I see it. right? This is the bare minimum that the international community can do, and they are, given the lack of confidence that most countries, including India, has in the Taliban in some ways, there would be limits to how far they'll go in giving that kind of leeway to the Taliban moving forward. But yes, for the basic minimum, that kind of outreach is important, and this is what we are talking about. Even when it comes to India's presence in Afghanistan, it's not about really endorsing or empowering the Taliban. It's mostly about the people of Afghanistan who really are in need of support, and for India to not be left out of Afghanistan, which is an important neighbor, completely.
When we talk about national interests in every country, following that, whether they're right or wrong, I mean, history judges that. But how would you see the UK's recent statement on no political violence to change the regime? Not the exact words from the statement, but we'll just put it up on the screen, which came just a few hours or a day before British nationals were released. So you could clearly see the quid pro quo there.
Yes, it's as you said, Amitabh, this is every country trying to look after their own. I mean, in UK, Afghanistan is not a big political issue, national issue anymore. The domestic politics of the United Kingdom, the politics of relations with the European Union, the Ukraine war in Russia, they're dominating the headlines over the past few months, and that is unlikely to change anytime in the future. The only time Afghanistan in recent weeks, when it came into prominence for a brief while, was when the parliamentary committees found out that there was sheer negligence on the part of some British officials at the moment of the collapse of the Republic in Afghanistan and the evacuation effort from Kabul in August 2021. That there was simply, I mean, it's a known fact. It was a completely unplanned, ill-executed, criminally ill-executed withdrawal of most of the Western forces, including the United Kingdom. That's when this issue came into prominence, and that too people are not talking about anymore. So you can see this kind of quid pro quo going on. Yes, the UK has been pretty open to talking to the Taliban. We have had delegations visit London. We have had delegations visit Oslo and elsewhere. And those people, those officials in UK who focus on Afghanistan on a regular basis, they are very clear about engaging with the Taliban, right? It's very clear in London that the footprint, the diplomatic and political and security footprint of London in Afghanistan will be limited. It will keep Pakistani interests in perspective, and it will focus on the humanitarian aspects of it rather than the geopolitical aspects of it moving forward. This is not a country they want to kind of revisit anytime soon, given the shock that they've experienced over the past 2 decades. So it's a very different plane when we think of Afghanistan from London than it would be perhaps from New Delhi or even Islamabad. So yes, you're right. It's national interests, and you can see the quid pro quo.
You've mentioned it a couple of times during this discussion itself. How do you see Iran and India's interests coinciding and each one helping each other in Afghanistan?
So Iran is one of the most important allies as far as India is concerned on the Afghan question, right? Barring the broader politics of West Asia, where Iran is also very important, and India's larger kind of relationship with the Abrahamic powers. I think there are 2 aspects to it. One, given the lack of access that India has, land access that it has through Pakistani territory into Afghanistan, Iran is the next best bet to have access, right? India has invested in the Chabahar port. That port, even if limited, gives access to Indian goods and ideas and people to Afghanistan and beyond to Central Asia. And that's the largest strategic play in picture, right? But the other fact is, if you look at the pure geopolitical aspects of it, Iran has actually been in a very strong competition with Pakistan to develop some degree of leverage over the Taliban and not let Pakistan have sort of a dominance over the Taliban's affairs, both within Afghanistan and elsewhere, right? So this is something that both Tehran and Islamabad, or Tehran and Rawalpindi, have been in a competition for over the past 7-8 years at least, especially after the announcement of the death of Mullah Omar in 2015. And for Iran, which is cash-strapped, which is geopolitically perhaps to some extent isolated, it's good to have India on its side in Afghanistan, because India comes with a different angle, and it allows Iran to kind of build and sustain that kind of outreach to the Talibs and other stakeholders on the ground in Afghanistan, including the resistance, which is down but not out. The NRF and other resistance forces, they're not gone, right? So this is where really Iran and India, there is a meeting of political minds that you don't want to leave the field, so to say, only for Pakistan to dominate and dictate, really. And that's an alignment which has which has a compelling logic to it, and we can see that play out in real time. Even some of the evacuations that India did last year, some of the evacuations actually happened through Iranian soil. So the promise that Iran has to, Iran's promise that they will offer logistical support in future for such evacuations, it's grounded in reality, it's grounded in fact. This is something which is fine. I'm happy to take the question by Giridhar Mamidi, which I'm guessing you have been articulating, Amitabh. It's how do you see the canvas play out in Afghanistan once the US starts engaging with Pakistan and the Shahbaz Sharif government? Look, I think this is something which is very important to note. Partly, having Shahbaz Sharif in power has made things easier both for India and United States in terms of dealing with Pakistan to some extent, right? Because the sort of populist politics that Imran Khan brought to the table, that's now gone. But the fact remains that unless there is a change of mind in Rawalpindi within the military establishment, there's not much difference that Shahbaz Sharif will make. The fact remains that it's General Bajwa who's very invested in Pakistan's outreach towards the United States, and he's interested. There is an interest within the Pakistani military establishment to keep the hostility with India, those temperatures of hostility at a little low. So you can see that happen in the endurance of the ceasefire over the past year or so, and I think that is something to keep an eye out for. More than what Shahbaz Sharif does, it's who the next chief of army staff will be and what will the inclination of that individual be once that individual comes to power, which will happen in the next 6 months, right? At the moment, Shahbaz Sharif government is dealing with a lot of domestic turmoil, right from a populist kind of onslaught by Imran, who's now in the opposition, to severe economic distress and debt crisis, which they're trying to deal with. And they're not electorally stable, so to say. Elections are yet due. Unless Shahbaz Sharif proves his electoral majority in the next elections, there's nothing much he can do in terms of making strategic decisions or making huge change, even though it's comfortable. It's good to have him over there as far as optics are concerned and history is concerned between India, US, and Pakistan. But the bigger change would be the next chief of army staff, and whoever that individual will be, whatever approach they have towards Kashmir, Afghanistan, and outreach to United States, keeping their reliance on China in perspective, that will be the most important factor. So I would say on that issue, we should just wait and watch.
How do you think, unless there are more stumbling blocks, India will, do I use the word escalate its re-engagement in Afghanistan?
I believe that India will not back off from the path that it has embarked in terms of engaging with the Taliban. Whether it escalates and becomes more ambitious is something that is not something that I would put my bets on. But I don't think India would necessarily be deterred by the attack at Karte Parwan Gurdwara and the signals that it sees coming from Rawalpindi as far as its outreach is concerned to the Taliban. That is a process which I believe, even if there's a bit of a even if there is a bit of a calming down of situation in the next couple of weeks, that process is unlikely to take a huge U-turn, so to say, anytime soon.
Right, Dr. So just thanking you for that and apologizing for the internet connection on my end. Thanks so much, Dr. Paliwal. Quite a comprehensive conversation we've had despite the technological issues.
Thank you so much for having me here, Amitabh. It's always an honor to be on StratNews Global. Thank you.
Pleasure, as usual, is always ours. And thanks to all our viewers for bearing with those technical issues that we had. Try to take some of your questions in between that. Thanks for watching The Gist on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi.